So I'm speaking today with, in order of presence on the screen, John Doyle. May I call you my good friend, even though we have
You
some?
can.
My good friend who works for the European Commission as part of their foresight group, tasked with looking forward for the 50-year, shall we say, 7 generations perspective on decisions being made today. We've got Robert Hunziker, who is a very, I'll call you a very wise journalist, because there are a lot of journalists who are a little bit off, and certainly, okay, who is very aware of the global climate situation, the global ecological rampage that humanity is making, and reports on it actively. So welcome, Robert. Thank you.
Thank you.
Doyle is a part of the team that I'm assembling. And then, of course, Roger, certainly not least. So he is co-founder of Extinction Rebellion. And my hat's off to you. Let me go find a hat. Thank you very much, Roger. You've done a huge service to humanity in making people realize and gather behind that banner, XR. Thank you. So let's go. I don't know who would like to start the discussion, but
I have some thoughts. Stuart.
You got it.
Yeah, that, I've been researching and writing about this for a number of years. And the thing that strikes me is that I keep running into year over year over year, unprecedented this, unprecedented that, 10 times more, than the paleo climate record, or 3 times more. But it's every year a new unprecedented. It's becoming an annual thing. It's building up to some kind of a crescendo. And I think we're starting to see that crescendo right now. And it lends itself to a real sense of urgency. And maybe the doomsday thing is more on deck than you realize.
Thwaites Glacier is one of the largest in Antarctica, and it is melting at an alarming rate. The world took notice earlier this month when temperatures there hit nearly 70 degrees.
I've got an article coming out tomorrow. The title of it is The World on Fire. The World on Fire. It's literally on fire. A couple things I just want to bore you with, maybe, and hopefully I don't bore you, but
You won't.
according to the Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service, in June and July of this year, the Arctic fires have released 204 megatons of CO2. Now, in all of last year, the fires released 140 megatons.
Around the
What
world,
I'm saying,
or in the Arctic?
no, it was just the fires in the Arctic fires last year. They had the fires last year also, same as this year. But the difference is, last year the total was 140 megatons for the fire season in the Siberian Arctic. This year, in June and July alone, 2 months only, 204 megatons. This thing is a monster. It's biblical. So there's an additional problem in the Arctic that comes from this Copernicus Atmosphere Monitoring Service. And this part of it comes from a gentleman named Thomas Smith at the London School of Economics. They did some measurements of what's happening in the Siberian Arctic. And half of these fires now are burning peat soil. And what's kind of strange about this is ordinarily peat is way too wet, it's way too cold to burn. But the high temperatures are so powerful, they're literally baking the Arctic. And peat soils, once they start to burn, they burn forever, and they emit both CO2 and also methane. This is an enormous biblical problem. In addition to that, the Amazon rainforest, in July alone, they identified 6,803 fires in only July because of what was happening in the Amazon rainforest. Now we're 30% worse, and the fire season, and here's what's really got a lot of people on the green train, really upset. The fire season hasn't even really started yet. Superimposed on top of that, look at what happened to Australia last year. Entire landscapes were decimated last year in Australia. And this is all because our goddamn planet is heating up way too much in too many fringe areas where people don't live. And the planet can't handle it. And so I think maybe it's almost a mistake to cancel the doomsday. I think John Doyle ends up becoming a prophet based upon his speech. That's what I think.
Let me clarify, Robert. I have to interrupt. I am not against the concept that we may well have sealed our fate, personally. However, we are subject to extreme ostracism, criticism, ridicule.
I know.
By saying there's no hope, by saying there's no chance of averting. And the other thing is that you're looking at the anthropocentric view. Yes, humans may be out of here, but my mission is to look at the bigger view of life on Earth. And so it's our mandate, our responsibility to end the madness in any way we can as soon as possible to preserve the possibility of life on Earth.
But it's all really come into place since the start of the new century, since 2000. And this is when the rapid acceleration takes place, and you see it in the numbers. Let me just throw a couple things by you here, because this is telling us that we've got a much bigger problem than anybody. You know, Michael Mann, I noticed, put out a video not too long ago, Mr. Hockey Stick, downplaying this whole doomsday thing also, and downplaying the whole thing about the East Siberian Arctic Sea methane eruption, the potential, big eruption out of there, and downplaying that and saying that's just not going to happen. And I'm not a climate scientist, but I think he's wrong. Well, here's what I'd like to tell Michael Mann. If you look at the ice mass loss in Greenland and Antarctica combined in the 1990s, those two are the biggest ice, those are 95% of the ice on the planet. Those two sources lost 89 billion tons per year of ice on average during the 1990s. In the 2010s, it's 523 billion tons per year versus 89 billion tons. Is that acceleration? You're damn right that's acceleration. Not only that, the Great Barrier Reef has had 3 devastating bleaching events in only 5 years. In March of this year, they looked at 1,036 reefs that were totally bleached out. In every segment, there are 3 regions of the Great Barrier Reef. There's the north, there's the middle, there's the south. This is the first time, here we go, unprecedented again, first time ever, all 3 regions are bleached. We're losing the Great Barrier Reef, Mr. Mann. Not only that, is the droughts are coming so rapidly on the heels of one another that it doesn't have the chance to regrow the way it used to. Because if you leave it alone, it'll regrow really fast, but it can't because the droughts are coming too fast. Now, on top of that, you've got humanity chopping down the trees just as fast as they can. And you've got some 300-year-old, 500-year-old, 1,000-year-old trees, and they love cutting them down. So to me, it's almost insane for a climate scientist to come out and say some of the things some of these people are saying. And I'll leave it at that. The Barents Sea. Now, the Barents Sea, Dar Jamal's book, The End of Ice, that's a brilliant book. If you haven't read it, you need to. But what Dar Jamal did is he actually boots on the ground journalism. He goes to the sites and he sees them and he talks to the people there. And there's a climate scientist named Ira.
I've seen him.
Leifer.
Yeah.
Leifer, yes. And he does
Stuart has
work,
interviewed him as well. Yeah. Yes, sorry.
he does work for NASA. And he did this work in the Barents Sea, and he found you're probably your mouth's going to drop open, but 60 million plumes of methane. And I think the problems are huge. And I think we do have a doomsday situation. And I think that as far as Roger's concerned with Extinction Rebellion, I can't congratulate you enough for the kind of work you're doing, because it's thankless, almost thankless. And I'm sure you create an enormous number of enemies, but someone has to do that. Someone's got to get out there and kick butt, because the scientists aren't going to do it.
But I have been enormously grateful for the journalism you've done, Robert, because you're one of the few journalists, I think, that have really made clear in everyday language the total shitstorm that we're in. I mean, we're already in it, aren't we? And it's only going to get exponentially worse. And I was going to say, I consider one of the reasons I'm on this call, and one of the reasons I helped to settle Extinction Rebellion, is I consider myself a ruthless empiricist. I like to look at what's happening, which is why Extinction Rebellion was successful. A bit like Peter Wadham's. I don't read books on social change. I go out on the street, interview people, work out how they tick, work out, what motivates them, and how you can create organizational structures that can facilitate mass civil disobedience. And that's why I've been successful, is I'm not really interested in, what some academic from LSE that's been sitting there for 30 years wants to tell me. And as you can imagine, there's been quite a lot of people like that who've deemed to inform me how to change the world. It's full of people that have weird and wonderful views. And I just go out and study it. And,
Roger, can I interrupt you a second? Can I just ask, how has the pandemic affected the ability of Extinction Rebellion to function? And how are you helping the younger generation cope with this, what they're growing up into, and the shock of it?
Well, since Extinction Rebellion was successful, people have got this rather embarrassing idea that I can sort of click my fingers and come out with the golden bullet that's going to save the world. And unfortunately, I'm not. Extinction Rebellion did a lot of good, but obviously, like everything else in the world, it has a limited effect and a limited knowledge and a limited ability. And when a once in 100-year sort of pandemic comes along, then you shouldn't be surprised if I say it's more or less buggered us. Because, there's the physical reality that you can't really get out and talk to people face to face. And, mobilization is essentially an emotional process. It's you're sitting in a village hall in Cornwall with 5 mothers in tears because their children are going to die, right? You don't really get that on Zoom. You can, but it dampens, what I mean? It's like human community is all about face-to-face sort of dynamics. So the upshot of it is we're in a bit of a mess. And this is a disaster, of course, for the climate crisis, because we need to have a global momentum of mass civil disobedience, broadly defined, in order to, do what we all stay up at night wanting to see happen, right? Which is something to happen, and nothing's happening, right? I mean, I'm one of the severest critiques of Extinction Rebellion as it happens, because, loads of people have come out with warm words, but fuck all's happening, right? In any substantive sense. And it's not like I'm some extreme sort of idealist here. It would be great, wouldn't it, if the British government decided to insulate 50% of the British houses? That would sort of be a start, but it's not even got to that level, never mind the complete reconstruction of the economy that needs to happen and will be happening anyway, because we'll be forced into it in a few years' time. So, this is one of the main things I have to argue with people, of course, because they always have this vague, naive idea that there's normal and then there's what Roger Hallam wants them to do. And it's like, no, the normal doesn't exist. It's like you do what I'm broadly saying, or you all die in some fascistic sort of nightmare. So those are the two options that are on the table, just as when you get cancer, there isn't the option of reversing and walking back out the door and not having cancer again, as no doubt Stuart knows. So, that's the way life is. And so coming on to the kids, I mean, my view is there's a massive, massive problem with youth mobilization because there's a lack of mentorship and a lack of what's in the trade called demonstration effects on what classical political struggle looks like in the Western world, at least. In the global South, they're quite good at revolutions. You know, one happens every 6 months to a year. You know, there was one in Algeria, and then they had Sudan and Armenia, all these places no people don't really notice. But, you know, it's actually reasonably straightforward to bring down the government. You just need, you know, a certain percentage of the population stay in the streets for 10 days for 2 weeks. Unfortunately, we haven't got to that tipping point, but, you know, that tipping point is coming, of course, when an ecological 9/11 sort of event starts happening. But in the meantime, the big problem with youth mobilization is the lack of, you know, is the lack of organizational and political imagination. You know, standing outside your school with a placard is all very well, and it will get you a handshake with the, you know, UN General Secretary, but you're going to have, you know, a few thousand people in prison, relative, you know, give or take, in order to decarbonize the German economy. And, you know, that's my day job, is working out those stats, just as, you know, John Stewart or whatever work out, you know, what the methane rate is. I'm working out arrest numbers. But the methodology is the same, right? It's like you look in the past, you look at other case studies, you make an informed guess. It's always, you know, a probability analysis, as everything is in complex systems. But that doesn't mean you can't come out with robust analyses. So, yeah. So one of my main aims is to have more dialogue with the world youth.
God bless you. Whether you believe or not you believe it, may the universe bless you for having taken it to the streets.
Yeah, I think I'll shut up in a minute, but, you know, this is probably my central contribution to the video, apart from, you know, assessing how fucked we are. But, you know, the central sort of analysis here is that increasing awareness is a necessary step, but a completely inadequate step in producing structural political change, right? This is what Martin Luther King discovered. It's what Gandhi discovered. Every like radical political change, you know, leader in the last 100 years has basically gone into social situations and had to battle against people that just believe in awareness raising, right? You know, you can see the film of Selma where Martin Luther King goes into Selma and there's all these guys going, hang on a minute, why have you come in? You know, we're doing loads of awareness raising, you know, about how bad racism is. And he's saying, yeah, that's all bollocks, right? Basically, you need people on the street and cause a fuss. And that's how it's going to work. And he changed, you know, 70 years of history in 6 months. And that's basically what's required. What's required is for Greta to go and get arrested and go and hunger strike, right? That's going to bring you into the realm of political struggle. And, you know, and I'm not saying this because I'm trying to be macho, unpleasant, or revolutionary, right? I'm fundamentally an empiricist and a political scientist. I'm simply saying that when you're dealing with, you know, a massive power battle, it's not pretty. It doesn't need to be, you know, millions of dead bodies on the street, but it has to engage. You basically need tens of thousands of people to continually break the law. And if Greta if Greta's, you know, fantastic work doesn't lead to that, it's going to have zero effect, effectively, on the reduction of carbon emissions. So
we're dealing with a situation.
We're
dealing with a situation which, when I was growing up, I knew it to be called an immovable object meeting an irresistible force. And people in the streets getting arrested, hunger strikes, is the irresistible force. The immovable object is neoclassical economics with all of its political allies. So,
yeah, that's it. I rest my case.
Okay.
I wonder, you know, John, I listened to your talk this morning, and it seems very dire. We're going to 10 degrees instead of 2 degrees or even 4 degrees Celsius. When you distribute this information, as again, I was asking Roger, how do we present that to people who are young and looking for, you know, their lives? Are they going to feed into a system that's completely destructive, or is there some way of presenting this information without completely destroying their emotional well-being or their capability to act?
I'm glad you asked me an easy question. Part of that was getting people to try and reconnect with what it is that's more essential in terms of the way they think and be. The reality that we face, if you like, the flow or the way that underpins what the little bit that we think we see. So a lot of what I hope people take away from anything that I might say or do is, and actually this doesn't really sound like me, but it's a degree of humility about what's happening here. So I've come to see things, I would say at the moment, quite differently from Roger and from Stuart, but I get the feeling that Robert might be on the same kind of voyage, that we might be currently floating down the river in roughly the same way. I'm an engineer, not by training or really by disposition, but it did give me the discipline to think about figures and so on and so forth. So one of the things that got me really interested in the climate was a wonderful video by an old guy called Bartlett, Professor Bartlett, on humanity's greatest failing being the inability to understand the exponential function. And I still have, it was Albert Bartlett. It's a wonderful, wonderful presentation. It was probably one of the very first presentations ever put on YouTube. It's hilariously gawky and awkward, but it's utterly brilliant. And it gets, you know, for somebody, an engineer is somebody who's kind of almost by definition a systems-y type person. You look at the bigger system. The architect sort of says, this is the most beautiful bridge I've ever seen. The landowner says, yes, and this is, you can have my land here. And the poor old civil engineer is sort of saying, yeah, it's a nice bridge, but will it actually go into this ground? And, you know, how often do we get big wave surges, or does the wind blow? So engineers are kind of congenital warriors, you know. We always feel that the bigger part of the system has been missed, and that's what I see now. I find the notion of blame, for example, you know, whether you choose to blame Trump for being an asshole, we all know he's an asshole, or Mother Teresa for not promoting contraception, it doesn't much matter. You know, good and bad define one another, you know, left and right, up and down. So what's really going on is a much more interesting question for an engineer. So I have a good friend, Phil Murta, who will undoubtedly watch this, who's much better at thermodynamics than I am. And we kind of discovered together a wonderful guy called Garrett, who did a wonderful thermodynamic assessment of the way, you know, human society simply grows. And irrespective of where you make the investment, it always looks like about, you know, we generate about 0.97 milliwatts of heat for every US dollar normalized to 1990 rates. And it doesn't matter how that society grows. Even more interestingly, in very recent times, I'm talking about the last 2 or 3 months, a wonderful character called Sid Smith has articulated better than anyone I have seen yet the kind of bind that we as animals in this space seem to have found ourselves. I ally that with a lot of thinking about what we think we know. So many of you will be familiar with Newton's famous, I frame no hypothesis. Do you remember what he was referring to? People think that Newton discovered gravity. Nothing of the sort happened. What Newton did was describe the utterly impossible. In about 1666, 65, he said, look, I can actually write equations that show why the moon is doing that, or why an apple falls to the ground. I can write you an equation, but there is no physical connection, and this makes no sense to me. Newton totally agreed with the people of his time that his proposition was utterly preposterous, that there was some sort of weird action at a distance. And so what actually happened was the bar of the Enlightenment was dramatically lowered by Newton's refusal to frame a hypothesis that we continue to refuse to frame, because our dear friend COVID, which came from nowhere, has implemented for us changes of the scale that people have been talking about for many years, changes that we would have been utterly incapable of making ourselves. So something's going on, and I am trying to release myself from the particular old white male disease of thinking I know what's going on and that I can direct others to do something that would make it better. You know, what I do is what I'm doing here. Yeah, that's it.
I appreciate your perspective immensely, but we disagree in the point that I used to teach my students when I taught statistics, that no event that you can describe in statistical terms is 100% probable until it's already happened. So yes, it's extremely likely, maybe to 0.999999, a bunch of nines, that we're going to crash for reasons that Robert outlined at the beginning of the conversation. Things are not going exponential, things have gone exponential. We are facing huge things that the media is ignoring, or it's a headline and the news cycle has it off. The COVID replaces everything, you understand. But it is not a fruitless endeavor to work for change, because it ain't.
I never said it was a fruitless endeavor to work for change. Okay. I'm doing what I do now. Yeah. Okay. That all natural systems that are in homeostasis grow and collapse. Rivers flow left and then right. We ridiculously call them meanders because from a distance it looks gentle. There's nothing gentle about it at all. It crashes against one bank, finds a rock, crashes against another. Our species is going to crash. The system, the hive system that we have built, this wonderfully connected globally, whatever you want to call it, crashes now. It is in the process of crashing. The question is how we manage that individually and collectively. The crash is coming. You know, the point that Roger was making about getting people in the streets. Well, COVID has taken them out of the streets. COVID has taken them out of the cars. I know people who have been offered wonderful jobs selling very expensive German cars in Wuhan, and whoa, they're not interested. So the change is here in ways that we couldn't predict. And my friend Philip, again, I was talking to this morning, sorry for quoting you, Phil, but he said something beautiful today, and he sort of said, maybe it's not leaders we're going to be needing, but shepherds. And I think that's rather beautiful. And because this happens. And whether a species squeezes through the little bottleneck, I don't know. But the system that we live in can't survive COVID. And the system that we live in can't survive climate change. And we have to make this, and this change is happening. Wow. So I'm much more interested, not in sort of saying we need to do X, Y, Z, but how do we live now in this moment? Which is a much more kind of, in answer to the question that was put to me, I guess it's a much more feminine perspective, and I would really like your reaction to what I've tried to say there, if that would be possible. Dave.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate what you're doing and your understanding of the situation. I think that humanity has to have stability no matter how this is going to occur. And it's a question of creating the ethical atmosphere that will produce our capability to join forces, to unite again with our common biology, the ecosystem that we all live in, to understand the unity of humanity and its planet is the primary, I guess, possibility.
Yeah, but guess, leave yourself some space to work inside the guess. Yeah, you said, I guess you don't know. I don't know either. Yeah, I'm genuinely really struggling with this. So it's just the thought. It's just the thought of okay, we need to have a common what? Do we?
We are in fact united.
Very good.
Have a common planet.
Exactly.